Okay, hello everyone. Great to have so many of you tuning in to such an interesting and important topic today. My name is Kate Tarrant and I work for the Lower Blackwood Landcare Group. For those of you that don't know us, we're a not-for-profit independent landcare organisation with an interest in sustainable agriculture and the broader environment in the Lower Blackwood catchment. You can find out a bit more about us and the work we do on our website, lowerblackwood.com.au. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we all live and work. I acknowledge the Wadandi and Pibbleman people of the Bibbulmun Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Just a few words on how the webinar will run today. You may have noticed by now that you can hear us but not speak yourself. That's deliberate so we can keep things moving along at a good pace. You can definitely still ask questions though. In fact, this webinar has been designed specifically to allow a substantial amount of time for questions. So don't be shy. Just type your question anytime into the chat box and I'll make sure it gets asked either during or at the end of the presentation. Also, if you run into any technical difficulties, please use the status buttons at the bottom right-hand side of your screen to let me know. You'll see a little hand down there. And I'll see if I can fix it at our end. Don't worry though, if you have to leave early or you drop out for whatever reason, we'll be recording the session, which I'll email out to you next week. Okay, to the reason we've all tuned in, today we welcome Niels Olsen. As you know, Niels is the inventor of the Soilkee Renovator, Soilkee Pasture Renovator, and together with Corporate Carbon was issued the first soil carbon credits under the Australian Government's Emissions Reduction Fund in March 2019. In just 6 years, Niels used his invention in combination with multi-species cover cropping to lift soil organic matter levels from 2% to 10% on his beef property in Gippsland, Victoria. In our webinar today, Niels will share his experiences in using cover cropping to improve the health of his soils, pasture, and consequently his livestock and profitability over the past 6 years. So over to you, Niels.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Just trying to get hold of this actual presentation. Here it comes. Yep, very good. Really, the whole start of the Soilkee system was where I was at farming back in sort of probably early 2000s. I was actually dairy farming, doing some earth moving, and really struggling to get that advice on how to get productivity on the dairy farm. And one of the things that the advice around at the time was really pushing those high fertilizer rates into the soils to push our production. And I was doing fairly well with the earth moving, supplementary income coming in, and that really led us down the path of putting quite a bit of synthetic fertilizers on, and really fantastic results. Grew a lot of feed for a couple of years. Then it came in a bit dry and the farm really browned off. And the problem I really struck with was my farm was browning off. The grass was really just stopped growing and the neighbours were still green. So the initial frustration there of trying to do best practice and failing miserably pretty well, and spending a lot of money doing it. So that really came to a point of okay, I got to work this out myself, and went off and did a few soil chemistry courses and look at different farming systems around the world, and that's what really led us into working with the natural systems of the soil. And that's what led us down this path to developing the Soilkee. So one of the main things that we've focused on is sequestering the carbon and really achieving that soil's building ability of carbon and nutrient cycling, which is increases the yield of what you're trying to grow, but it also really builds that carbon up in your soil. And that's one of the things where we've saw the benefits of getting more organic matter there, more organic matter cycling and building carbon, holding more moisture, was the whole driving force of where we were heading. And this is some of the early data that we did, a few of the results on, like, plant available nitrogen up 122%. Well, that was really getting the soil nutrient cycling, improving the aggregation of the soil, getting some of the nitrogen that's in there into the soil and then captured by the plants. And it was really the increases in available nutrients coming through the system by not applying any as well. So having your dry matter yield up 30%, crude protein 13 to 45%, was really just showing the better quality coming through from the natural systems in the soil. And that's what got us really excited on what we can achieve. And this is just the starting point in the first year on this trial. So that's where we've focused on and followed down that system. And here's a slide with your the key parts up the top. It's like penetrometer readings going down at 5 centimetre intervals across, and then the centimetres 2, 4, 6 and 8, 10, 12, 14 down on the left hand side. Now you can see the blue lines, a straight one and a broken one. That's just the different times of the year. Control, fertiliser, the other two lines. The actual improvement in softening of the soil around the key, which is a rotating blade, which is normally blamed for compaction, but because the way the Soilkee system works, it actually enhances the activity of the soil and softens it up naturally. So you're actually getting a softening around that activity by the nutrient salting that's created, which really enhances that penetration of water and air into the soil structure and then capturing it as well. So, and here's how it looks after the Soilkee's been through the pasture. So it's virtually a perennial paste pasture, and we run the Soilkee through. It puts 7 rows of slightly tilled soil, about 75 mils wide, about 100 mils deep, across the 3 metres, and the seeds dropping out the back of the machine there into the tilled trench, and that's a few perennial seeds plus annual cropping seeds as well, and a few herbs and stuff in there as well. This is the machine in action. This is what it looks like when it's going. So you can see there on that short little video that it's quite a bit of soil flicking around from the trench, but you're only disturbing about 17% of the soil surface. So you're maintaining your fungal population ready to repopulate out underneath that actual sheet composting effect of that soil going back over some of the pasture, which really enhances that fungal population to take off in your soil. And that's what gives you that extra photosynthesizability and puts more sugars out as well. Here we have a slide that's showing that preferential grazing. There's some Angus heifers down there on the sort of dam bank. They've been walking around the corner here of the dam bank to their water trough, but in the background you can see the dried off summer crop. It's maize and a few other bit of millet, and it's had peas and oats and everything in there as well. But they've been grazed off over about 5.5 weeks, a couple of metres at a time across that paddock. And on that grazed area, they're taking the crop down virtually, very close to the dirt, but they're not coming back grazing their old existing pasture at all, or hardly at all. They just so much prefer the first time planted crop, which has been virtually everywhere that we've been. And sometimes to a detrimental effect, because the cows will graze heavily where the machine's been and leave the rest of the paddock, and it's been causing overgrazing. So if you do the whole paddock and graze it properly, it works fine. But if you've got the preferential grazing and they leave the old pasture behind that you're trying to weed out, and they just overgraze where the soilkee's been because of the nutrients they're chasing out of it.
Niels, there's a question just come in, it's probably related to the slide before, about the perennial pasture. The person wants to know if it's irrigated or not.
No, there'll be no irrigation, but 1,000 mil rainfall. So whether you call it irrigation or not, so that's West Gippsland, Victoria. Those photos. So and well, it's late summer, but yeah, still fairly good as far as rainfall compared to some areas. Really, if the moisture's reasonable in the soil and you've got soil temperature, it performs quite fine. No worries at all. This slide here is just a bit of a summary of results of a trial they did down at Buffalo. Now, there's like in the middle of it, there's a few cattle grazing, and then a green line around the cattle in the paddock. Now, that's when they were first led into the paddock, and all the cattle go and graze where the Soilkee treatment's been for the last 2 or 3 years in that area. And then up in the soil cores, you can see what sort of root mat on the surface, and then not much sort of carbon in the soil at all on 2 samples. But then where the Soilkee's been in 3-4 times, you can see the carbon really coming down, holding the moisture. You can see how much moisture's in the core as well. Like you're actually retaining moisture and having it there to grow for the plants. And then, like even on your perennial ryegrass and clover cover down on that bottom graph, just because you've had Soilkee in there, it's enhancing what was already growing as well. So you're actually getting extra dry matter yield, but you're enhancing the plants and getting better ground cover just because you're getting better nutrient cycling from the Soilkee action. And like even up looking at the calcium, that's like kilograms a hectare. You've got like 2,399 in control, where you got 5,700 something in Soilkee with no lime applied. So you're getting that so much more available. It's nearly double, just in 3 applications over 3 years. So it's the biology that's bringing it available, and that cycling of nutrients is what grows your plants, and that's what everyone's after. So yeah, that's the main thing we're aiming at. This is the next slide, which is really just showing what the crop comes up like. This is a crop planted. I think it was virtually around end of May here, so it's an autumn planting, and you've got your actual pasture underneath that crop, and you've got the crop filling the whole gap virtually on the surface. So it's like a multi-layered crop, or the crop's on top, but the existing pasture's underneath, which ends up being a lot more solar panels on your paddock and a lot more productive. Then this is some of the yield. This is like a grazing that was harvested in December. And like down the bottom on the graph, you got dry weight, and the December one was like 14.5 tonne dry matter on that crop. That's me standing in the back of the crop, and I'm nearly 2 metres tall. So that was the crop that we grew over that period from June to December. So it was sort of late June and mid-December. So it's had that, you know, five months of growth. But the palatability of what was left is 80% fantastic palatable. 20% was pretty well left on the ground as stubble. Then it was worked into the next crop, which is you know, a good composting effect there. And the cost of that year of cropping 3 times, it ended up about $38 a tonne dry matter, where the farmers over here are doing around that $130 to $150 a tonne dry matter. So it's quite cost effective in the area for what you're growing, that's for sure. Very low input. Using what's in the soil to actually grow the crop, and the air, water and sunlight really that grows most of what you're trying to achieve. So,
Niels, can we just go back to, sorry, it's skipping around a little bit, but we didn't have a chance when you watched the video because the sound was too loud for you to talk over top. But someone's asked about the device that you towed behind the tractor in the video, the tyres. What was it and what was it for?
The tyres. The tyres really just smooth out the odd clod or two that are hanging behind it, and if there's a bit of seed close to the surface, it covers that up as well. It just smooths it a little bit off. And when you're not chasing a lot of coverage of your green pasture, the tyres will rattle a little bit more of that soil off, and virtually everything that the cows would have grazed normally without the Soilkee through there still comes up through that dust coating of the soil. You saw there was quite a bit of soil flicking around at the front of the machine. So you know, you've probably got 80–85% of the soil ends up back in the trench, but the rest of it is spread across, which gives you that green manure effect. And you take a bit of that soil back off the pasture, so you get a little bit extra of the green coming up. You want some of the green to be the lower leaves that would dry up as stubble to be left covered up by the soil, because that's the main fungal food for your increasing that population and getting your photosynthesis picked up as well. Get that efficiency up where it's putting sugars out of the root systems.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep. Well, this is the sunlight, the solar panels. This is one of the main things that really feeds your soil, gets your nutrients mined up that are locked up out of your soil. So the emphasis on not grazing too short is fairly big, and leaving your as much solar panels green and functioning on your paddock as you can. This is the aeration nitrogen type thing, which is, if you've got really good fungal population in your soil, you'll create aggregation through your whole soil structure, and that air is able to get into your soil structure, and bringing with that is that 78% nitrogen. So that nitrogen then can be picked up by your legumes and then push out 20-tonne dry matter without applying any synthetic nitrogen. You just use what's in the atmosphere. And yeah, it seems to be the best for the environment, and one of the big keys or big nutrients required for building carbon in the soil as well. So legumes are a necessity, but functioning legumes are what you need. So you've actually got to have the air around the root systems, otherwise you're really restricted at the capability of putting nitrogen back into your soil. This is that sort of aggregation again, showing that there's a fair bit of organic matter sitting around cycling, and really good worm activity. You're getting your worms that are, each time they're putting their own body weight of soil through them each day, that you're actually making 5 to 7 times more available nutrients. You're releasing the calcium, and our pastures now, we're getting sort of 15 to 20 mil of worm castings over the whole field, which is about 40 tonne a hectare. And the nutrient cycling in that and the fungal growth and the little mushrooms popping up over the whole paddock is just prolific every year now. It takes a little while to build. You've got to have all that nutrient cycling, get it all started, but once it's happening, it just does it every year. And if you've got that creation of nutrient cycling and building of topsoil every year, that's what we're chasing. This is that water holding capacity, building the carbon in the soil, which really shows how quick it can happen too. As soon as you trigger that nutrient cycling and you've actually formed carbon, it's not just the root mat, it's actually a formed carbon, will hold water in your soil. The more carbon you get, the more cleaner water that runs off your property. It's like it's a filter, holds the nutrients in the soil as well, so nothing hardly leaches. That's one of the main things that really give us an extension into the summer period, is the ability to hang on to moisture, which these cores here that we've taken, they're about 20 metres apart, 10 metres into the neighbouring property, 10 metres into our property. So it's just exactly the same soil type, but we've had 6 years pretty well of Soilkee on that now. This was probably taken a year ago, but they're 10 centimetre intervals on those texture lines on the actual plastic that the core is sitting in. So in the control, which has only got 2 or 3 centimetres of moisture in the surface, yet we've got like 30 centimetres of moisture 20 metres away in the same soil, and built a lot of carbon up and converted that sort of really it's like a bit of a sandy clay. It's been converted into topsoil over that 6 years. So like it's really been building, 20, 30 millimetres of topsoil a year as we've been Soilkeeing over that area. And these are a close up of the top of the core, and then there's the whole core on the top of it as well, which shows you like even down deeper, you've actually got some moisture down in the bottom of the core, but you've got that dry clay in between. So once we get the top moisture all the way down, capturing the moisture that's underneath, and the root system's going down there, we'll be tapping into the moisture that's underneath and utilising that through the summer period. So pretty well no need for irrigation over here once we tap into that, but it might be 4 or 5 years away, but that's what we're aiming for. So we'll see whether we get there in 4 or 5 years. This is this CO2 sequestering that. Really got to have your nutrient and your fungal population aggregating your soil to capture everything. If you've got no air in your soil, you're not going to capture much. If you've got no air in your soil, you're not going to get the nitrogen to run the system. You've got to have enough nitrogen to break down your stubble, your old roots. And it's really that 20 to 1 normal type composting effect. You have to create that to break those nutrients down that have already been grown by your soil, but they're sitting there as a stubble. You need to convert them back into something to grow your next plant, which is the main thing that gets those nutrient cycling and builds that fungal population, which really holds that water. Once you've got the fungal population through your soil, it doesn't wick up and evaporate out. You're actually hanging onto it in your soil structure. This is how we see our all the nutrients. Yes?
Sorry, I just had a question about how you actually collect the core sample.
You broke up there a bit.
I had a question about how you collect your core samples. How do you actually do that?
It's a 40 mil core that the West Gippsland Catchment Management Authority came and took the samples on a field day. So that they just got this, it's a core on the back of a ute, and they just whack them down with like a hydraulic rammer on a 40 mil core sample, a metre deep. So Then they just get the sample, push it out onto the tube, and there it is. And it's the same. It's the same way as I did all the core sampling for the collecting for the carbon credits and stuff as well. So,
okay.
Yeah, I do the same.
I have another question.
Yep.
Another question related to, I'm not sure if it's this slide he's referring to, but he asks, why did nutrient levels drop from aeration on the Soilkee aeration side? Is that a boom bust response to aeration with microbes burning carbon responding to aeration?
I'd be looking at the aeration was like a spiky roller, and I would be tipping that if you looked into it, it would be an actual leaching effect. So there's no nutrient in the soil. You disturb it, you get rainfall event on it, and it just leaches down out of the profile that was tested next time. So that, and that's in the aerator part of it. So there was control, Soilkee, and a rotating aerator trying to break up the root mat. And yeah, the aerator probably didn't go too well. Next slide. So yeah, this is your soil's your bank of nutrients, but you've actually got to get them out of the soil to utilise them. So you need your microbes to be accessing that. So you need air in there to feed the system. You need moisture and you need warmth and a food source. Most people seem to forget about the food source. And you don't need much food source to feed your biology, but it's got to be helpful and giving the ability to keep it diverse, not overloaded in one area and overload one type of food source, like a bacterial food, like a high nitrate. The bacteria just dominates and takes all the food, and there's no food left for anything else. So, a balanced approach at mining that, yes. And this is sort of showing that it's the actual managers of the nutrients is the life in the soil. So you've got to have that in mind and looking after that, because that's what's going to give you the nutrients coming out of your soil. It's like getting the money back out of the bank. It's in there, but if you manage the miners to get that nutrient out well, you'll get it supplied when it's hotter and drier or colder and wetter. You can actually get nutrients to be built up in abundance, and then they'll last further through those times, and you can actually get it good enough that you'll actually still be mining nutrients through the tough times as well. And it's keeping that in mind. Food source to mine nutrients, keep that in mind, that you actually need that all year round, otherwise the plants won't grow.
As we've got mushrooms in the foreground there, someone
Yep.
did ask previously, is there a risk that the mushrooms are poisonous to the cows?
Oh, I haven't found it yet. No, so it's they're natural mushrooms in the farm anyhow. So yeah, the mushrooms that we've haven't seen any cows eat them. Put it that way, and had nothing die. So should be fine. But don't know what mushrooms you got in your farm. But yeah, here it's fine. No drama at all.
Someone's also asked if the Soilkee system is effective in paddocks which have some areas of gravel close to the surface.
Yep. Like gravel really needs that sort of little bit of soil or dusting that's around the gravel. Really needs that to be functioning well, and it's quite responsive too, because it doesn't take a lot of food source to feed all that nutrient that's in and around those few particles, and it responds quite quickly. In like a heavy sand or a heavy gravel, it seems to respond in that soil structure fairly quick. But as far as like a real chunky gravel, yeah, it's a bit harder for tilling and stuff like that, fairly wearing on blades and things like that. But you're try and minimize that and maximize the organic matter and the green matter covering, so that you get maximize your benefit of running the Soilkee through from improving your soil structure each time. So that's probably a more important focus. The harder it is to do in the conditions in the soil structure, the better you do it, or the more green you put back into your system to feed it each time you go through. Yeah. Yeah, this is like showing it's a perennial pasture, and we're really getting that capital gain out of the nutrient cycling and taking advantage of that, utilising the natural resources of all the nutrients in the soil, but of the air, water and sunlight as well. Like 97% of what grows your crop or your pasture is air, water and sunlight. So if you keeping focus on maximising all those three, and there's only that 3% you have to worry about coming out of nutrients, you don't need a lot of nutrient cycling and much of a food source, and you'll get that quite easily. It's just, yeah, maintaining air in your soils, compaction is probably the biggest one to focus on. This is some of the organic matter from 3% to 10.7 over 5 years. Like it's really, close to 80 or 90 tonne of organic matter per hectare extra. So there's quite a bit gone in from stubble and from parts of the root systems as well. But we're getting quite a lot of that from the sugars coming out of the soil structure, building the carbon. So having that actual cycling nutrients, where before we might have had 3%, but out of that 3% we had very little cycling. It was pretty stagnant and compacted, and not much of that organic matter cycling. Where now most of the 10% is somewhat cycling, breaking down, supplying all the nutrients to grow. And we only want to grow 20 tonne, and we've got 70 or 80 tonne cycling nutrients on the hectare as it is. So you've got ample nutrients building and cycling in your soil. Just keeping in mind that maintaining a food source, which is really maintaining a plant with solar panels all year round if you can, and probably the main focus to keep that happening. Here's sort of one of the paddocks we did.
Question about the soil.
Yep.
Hello, Niels.
Yep.
Just had a question on what the minimum and maximum depth of till of the Soilkee is. Someone's wanting to know if it would be okay to sow between olive trees, for example.
Yep, no worries. Olive trees, like you've probably got 40 mil would be the sort of minimum depth. You need to sort of get a bit of soil covering up in between the rows to create that green manure effect, which is really in between the olive trees. Building that fungal population is the must to really supply the nutrients that the olive tree requires. It's not really chasing that bacterial mined nutrients, it's really chasing that fungal mined nutrients. So as you increase your fungal population and cycling of that organic matter, there's ample there for the olive trees, and holds the moisture as well, and really helps provide nutrients for the olive trees to send their roots down deeper as well. It seems to be a really good combination of enhancing, and if you're not doing too much with what you're growing in between your olive trees and you're putting all of that back into the soil, you're building topsoil really quick, which the better that is, the better your nutrient supply is, and the better the moisture holding ability it is. So works really well. This slide here is just showing like a fair bit of actual stubble after the cows have grazed it, and then we'd run the mulcher over that and knock about half that stubble down, and then we would run the Soilkee over it, and that's covered quite a bit of that up. But in 3 or 4 days' time, that would be all popping back up through that dust coating and be looking quite green. So it's actual capturing a lot of that plant matter that is still green, and it's covering it up. So then it's like a bag on your back lawn. So if you've got your bag on your back lawn and it's got green grass underneath it, you pick it up, it's all gone white. It's lost that ability to photosynthesize. And then you leave it another week, it's all brown and slimy. And then all the worms have come in that 2 weeks. All the worms have come from 6 or 10 meters away and are feeding on that partially decayed plant matter, that brown slimy grass. That is that main fungal food that really aggregates your soil and keeps that structure in your soil, which then binds a whole different lot of nutrients for your plant, which then picks the photosynthesis up of that plant, the ability of it. And when it's got spare photosynthesis happening, it only needs a certain amount of carbon to build its plant structure. Anything above that, it puts out sugars out of its root system, which then mines more nutrients out of your soil. So having that balance really does increase it. And like your maximum depth, like 120 millimeters would be about the maximum depth that we would ever soil key, but normally around that 75 to 100 is ample enough to create that whole food source effect and sheet composting effect, and plant the seeds in a decent seed bed as well. This is just a basic sort of scenario on our seed mixes. We don't change it a real lot. We've got the autumn ones got probably the rye corn for the fibre, and in the spring and summer one, we put the millet in for that early fibre. Our biggest, I suppose, problem or overdone part of the Soilkee system is high protein in the forage. And when we're getting too much high protein in the forage, the cows can't digest it very well, and they scour and they'll won't get in calf, all that sort of thing, because it's just too rich. So having the fibre takes that straight away out. So all we got to do is put the millet and the rye corn in. That's early fibre and solves all that problem. And you're getting a 30-40% increase in your protein that you can grow on your farm, and it's well balanced and really good weight gain or whatever you're wanting to feed to an animal. It all works out really good.
Niels, someone has asked before about your paddock preparation slide.
Yep.
What have you got kikuyu in the paddock?
Probably one of the last slides. I could sort of demonstrate that. Yeah, second 25. I'll talk about that.
Okay. Come back to that.
Yep. So that's only 2 slides away.
Okay. And this is a comment rather than a question, I think. Autumn regeneration of pasture involving cultivation runs the risk of disturbing developing dung beetle larvae.
Yep.
With 75 to 120 millimeters depth and 17% soil disturbance, Soilkee may be the ideal implement.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what we find. You're disturbing soil. You just destroyed 17% of your soil. Like, you should not till soil if you want to look after soil. But 17%'s been disturbed, but it's creating 100 times more improvement in the cycling of the nutrients and building of the carbon. So at the end of the day, you're 10 to 100 times better off from a little bit of disturbance. So losing 17% of your larvae, yet you've got a food source for everything else in the soil system, and you've got aeration happening and fungal population happening. The rest of the larvae are going to have a great time in the rest of the soil profile as well. So you'll enhance them more than what you've lost anyhow, just in their effect. So it's really assisting the larvae at transforming some of the nutrients. You'll have increased your worm population by 20 times. So So that will make up for the few little bits of larvae that have been taken out as well. But I'll go on to this next slide, which is, that was a seed one. And this is sort of the dry planting. A lot of people sort of want a dry plant. Soilkee system works okay, dry planting, the same as anyone else dry planting. But the main benefit of the Soilkee system is enhancing the biological function of your soil. So if it's started, you can feed it so much more when you run the Soilkee through. So after the autumn break, when things have greened up, is the ideal time to get maximum benefit out of running the Soilkee through. So, and it's that really that nitrogen fixation that you're chasing and having the air in there. And it's even like the air's got to be in there, and you're, say, like the green photo here on the, was it the left of screen, you've got a pea plant in there which is nodulating up, very similar to what the centre photo would be in nitrogen nodules. Then you've got all your barley and your oats filling the whole field. But then underneath, if you look down in the real bottom corner of that green photo, you've got all your ryegrass and stuff still thick in the bottom. So as you graze that out, the ryegrass will thicken up. And as you graze that pea, it's exactly like it is there, just budding up, no actual pods coming on it. You've got all this nitrogen built up on the root system. You graze that off. All that nitrogen that's built up on that root system is then released into the soil. And then you can see in that centre soil photo, you've got a fair bit of old organic matter. So that nitrogen will then help convert that organic matter into available nutrient to grow the rest of the crop. And it does that in 3 or 4 weeks. So it's not slow. It's quite quick in turning those nutrients into available. So yeah, this is sort of like your grazing. Because you've got multi-species in there, that helps as well. Because you've got fungal population providing nutrients, that really ramps up the longevity of optimum grazing time. Like over here, they really push your ryegrass grazing at that sort of 20, 25 days, and no longer than, or no higher than 3 leaves, because as soon as they get that 4th leaf, the bottom leaf dies off and is not palatable and shrinks and disappears, translocates the nutrients to the higher leaf chasing the sunlight. But as soon as you've got your fungal population built up, you can get 7, 8 leaves on your ryegrass plant and they're all green. So it's lack of nutrient is what creates a problem. You supply plenty of nutrient, you can have palatability out for 3, 4 months, no worries at all. And you've got that few different species and a few herbs that give you that longevity in keeping the quality. And some of it might go a bit stalky, like in that big 14.5 ton photo. You might lose 20%. But then that 20% that's in stalk and stubble that you then return back to the soil feeds your soil and keeps it warm over the winter months. So you're actually using that as a benefit. You haven't lost it in that 20% because it's gone past palatability anyhow. So that's the whole picture. And we've got quite a number of dairy farms here that have been like 25 years grazing at their 3.5 to no more than 4 weeks, and now they're out getting close to their 3 months, so that they're up around their 10 and 12 weeks out. So this is just really changing their whole concept when you can provide the nutrients to the plant to achieve that. You just can't try to get those grazing rotations out that far when you've actually got a poor nutrient supply. This is a photo about the cooch grass. Now, the one with the people in it, that a bit of a field day we had, that's that sort of whole crop one again. Then you can see the guy here with the shorts on, standing next to the sort of the fence on the edge of the paddock. that's coots grass. So that whole field used to be 85% coots grass. Now it wouldn't be 1 or 2% where the soilkee's been. So the soilkee hasn't been right next to the fence, so it's just staying coots grass. And you change the nutrient supply to the plant. The plants that can handle that will perform. The coots grass can't really handle the competition over the winter months, so then it gets competed out, and we got the higher performing grasses, and then we'll plant into that our cereal crop as well, which is giving us 40, 60, 100% increase in productivity as it is. And then this is this bottom photo with all the fungal mushrooms and stuff poking up through that 20 mil of worm castings, which really changes the whole nutrient availability, and the weeds virtually disappear. Like we've even got weeds which there's still some around that really thrive in compaction, like dock in our wet areas. We've got a bit of dock, but the docks now get eaten by the slugs and the insects because they're not performing that well, because we're upping the nutrient cycling, and they just don't like the richer aerated environment. They prefer the actual compacted anaerobic environment, and they're still there, but they're dwindling down. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening, and any questions, it'd be really good.
So interesting, and yes, we've got some questions. Here's one here. So how many hectares can you cover in an hour with the Soilkee on average?
Sort of 1.5 to 2, and you can do more, but it takes like 4 or 5 times in, get the soil beautiful, fluffy, like it's virtually like your home veggie garden. Get your whole farm soil like your home veggie garden, nice and fluffy, and you can probably do 2.5 hectares an hour quite easy then, because you're not. It's just so fluffy that you're not worried about how much goes in the trench or doesn't. It just fluffs out the back beautiful.
Yeah. I've got a question actually regarding sort of mineral amendments, I guess, at the start of the process.
Yep.
I mean, did you add some mineral amendments before you started using the Renovator in the paddock for the first time, or?
No, not. We added minerals and limes probably 15 years ago. So we added your zinc and your copper and manganese and a few things that were lacking a bit. 15 years, which is probably 10 years before, 8 or 10 years before Soilkee, and we had limes on as well. But what we've found is, doing a total test of our soil profile, there is actual ample of those nutrients there. So when we were back testing, we were just testing for available nutrients, and they weren't available. The Soilkee system helps everything that's there come available. So, and you need very little of your micronutrients and stuff like that. So 1 or 2 times in, and all the micronutrients are available. So we haven't been recommending that, or even trying that, or even testing for it. The results that we've been getting just running Soilkee once or twice through seems to have all the plants growing healthy and functioning quite well, and really looking at the soil structure. So once the soil structure starts to aggregate, you've got that much nutrient cycling, everything available, that it's going fine. It'd only be in an extreme case where there was something extremely lacking that the whole area would be known for, that you might try something, and you would only try it just to help that really marginal country do something, because if it's capable of growing something green, it's capable of improving itself under the Soilkee system. So you don't need a lot of available nutrient. You just got to be able to grow something, and that's where having a few different types going in as seeds you're covering that range. Something in there will grow quite well, not 99 times out of 100. So, yeah. That's the approach that we take on it, yeah.
Which kind of segues a bit into the next question, I guess. This person's asking about how do you start fungal growth if the soil's pretty dead? They really, do you need compost teas, etc. first? I think you've kind of answered that. You just a couple of times.
I haven't found anywhere yet where there's no fungal population. So if you've got something green and you cover it up a little bit with the Soilkee system, you'll have fungal growth. If it's poor and you overload it with green, you will send it a bit anaerobic. So as your low fungal population, you only supply it with enough food source to handle building. Once you've built it up and you've got really good soil structure, you've got a 200 mil of aggregated, fluffy, nice topsoil, you can put quite a bit of green back in underneath the Soilkee system, and that will consume it because there's enough activity and enough cycling of nutrients to absorb that, enough carbon in the soil to absorb it. So it's a gradual approach. Farmers tend to want to, yep, this works, we'll do it 10 times as much, it'll work 10 times as quick. Well, it's not necessarily the case, because we tried that, and you put 10 times as much in, and then you turn the whole paddock into nitrate weeds. Well, then you've got to plant your cereals in there to try and burn the nitrate up and get it back to functioning again. And 2 times planting back in, and you're back going again. But it's just overloading the nutrients going in, and it's so powerful under the Soilkee system. With a little bit of 10 or 12 different actions creates that whole one result, and that seems to be the general consensus of most people that have looked at it, that it's the combination of all the little actions in the one pass, and the not disturbing the whole area, so your fungal population's ready to jump back out of that food source. That's that spaced apart, like they're 18 inches spaced apart, 450 mil. So you're actually got to have that, and that's specifically designed for that, because you want about 80 to 100 mil of soil undisturbed in there to maintain your fungal population to repopulate out. And you've got to maintain that, because your food source that you've created is only there short term. Otherwise, the juices and everything will evaporate back out, the gases will disappear, and they'll head back out to the atmosphere. So you need the fungal population to grab it. You need the cycling of nutrients to all be there. You need the aggregation to be there. That the whole lot all works together. If you overload it, you'll crash it. If you underdo it, it just takes a little bit longer. So overloading, it's probably the worst thing you can do. And everyone's always in a rush, but yeah, you just got to slow them down a bit.
Someone's asked about for farmers on small acreages, because they're saying it looks like a pretty big machine. Is there a possibility of manufacturing something smaller?
Yeah, there's probably a 1.5 wide one and 1.8. We've got probably be 20 on interested in buying those machines once we get them marketed out there. And there's a heap on the bigger ones too, like the 5 and 6 metre folding ones. But the most economic one, and the only one that we're building at the moment, because we're over 40 on back order, so we're sort of trying to catch up on them, is the 3 metre machine. Now the 3 metre machine, you can run on the rear of the tractor, and it's 3.5 it covers, but and then you can run a 3 metre mulcher on the front, which you're doing your mulching and your Soilkee all in the one pass, and the tractor handles that. So instead of going around the paddock twice, you've only got to go around the paddock once, and we do that in the autumn. So that gives all that stubble and the stalky stuff goes back in front of the Soilkee, underneath that Soilkee dusting, which really warms the soil up at 1.5 to 2 degrees over the winter months. And when you're from 4.5 up to sort of 5.5, 6, at 4 degrees, you don't get much nutrient cycling. You don't get much growth for 2.5 months here. Where at 6 degrees, you don't get huge growth, but you get some growth. And some growth when it's cold and wet is very, very valuable. It actually keeps the nutrient cycling, keeps the sugars going into your soil, keeps the bugs alive, keeps everything happening. So there's no shutdown and then start up again. That makes a big difference to the performance of your soil for the year. And the same thing in the summer. The more moisture holding ability, the more fungal population you've got in your soil, the less wicking effect and evaporation of all the rainfall that you've had. And if you can hang on to 40 or 60% extra moisture and put it into a plant instead of evaporating back out in the wind, you're that much better off. It's not funny.
How there's a question here about over here we mostly have annual pastures,
Yep.
and you're seeding your multi-species into perennial pastures.
Yep.
How would you see that as different over here? Any different, or
who told them to do that?
Someone a long time ago.
Well, yeah, they've been doing it here for a while too, like probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And the main sort of focus, this is in dairy farming. It's a little bit in beef, and yeah, they've been a bit not so sort of high input stuff. But your perennial pastures actually do a lot more to improve your soil structure and maintain your moisture holding ability and all those type of things, where your annuals will give you more yield for a shorter period and not look after your soil so much. So over here, they pretty well damaged their soil structure just the way they were farming by overgrazing or over fertilizing, and they really couldn't hold the high performing perennials. So that they were very expensive to plant out and they weren't lasting. So then the big favour comes in for annual planting. So they annual plant every year and get huge yield. And that was fantastic for 5 years. It was all right for 10 years. 15 years down the track, they're trying to farm annual ryegrass in concrete. Doesn't work very well. So they've forgotten all about their soil and just gone down on production, and it's okay for a little while, but down the track, and that's really where we're getting a lot of farmers now understanding they can get their autumn break in quite good rain, but nothing comes out of their soil because it's dead. It's actually no functionality of their soil. They've got to get their and they can put their fertilizer on and it still won't perform. They've actually got to get some sort of functionality over 6 or 8 weeks of having a bit of moisture and a bit of warmth before the synthetic fertilizers will even work. And then they'll grow something, and they'll grow a lot. They'll grow heaps for 3 months, then it gets too cold. And then they're stuck and can't grow anything. So they've got to feed out heaps of hay and silage and cut heaps of hay and silage, where the natural system of your perennial pasture, and if you can't handle your perennial pasture because you've got such a big summer gap, having some herbs, chicories or plantains, something to be green, alive in the soil, feeding the soil, will help it hold moisture and help some of those plants survive. And if you've got enough ground cover, you'll have some grasses that are perennial coming through some years, and you'll get a really good autumn break and you've got fantastic cover. So it's really maintaining something that's looking after your soil, or putting a value on your soil is actually what's growing your plant, not the fertilizer out of the truck. And if you don't look after it for 25 years, well, you end up with concrete. It'll take you, well, there's no one really over here that's anywhere near achieving turning that back around like what the Soilkee system's doing with productivity. They can turn it back around by cover cropping the whole thing and ploughing the whole thing back in but they've still lost that productivity, and still after they finish doing that, they haven't set their soil up to actually be a functioning soil in a perennial system, and it crashes again, and then you've got to do a green manure crop again. So it's actually, the Soilkee system helps you improve it and gives you that actual productivity extra along the way while you're doing it. So yeah.
Well, it looks like we're pretty much out of time, but before we finish up, there's quite a few people asking about whether there are any machines over here in the WA, and if there's any contractors. And Niels probably can't answer the contractors question.
Yeah,
I know there's at least one machine over here coming over here.
Yeah, it's on its way, but it's might be like a few months away from being built and sent over there yet. So, but I haven't even spoke to them about how popular they're going to be over there. But it's
well, for our audience's benefit, we've tentatively asked the person in question, and it may be that we're able to demonstrate the Soilkee at our Spring Field Day in October. Everybody who's watching, so watch this space. We hope to maybe be able to do that. For anyone that's interested in finding more about how the cost of machines, whatever, they can obviously contact you directly, Niels, right?
Yeah, anytime. Yep, no worries. Yep.
So I think we'll let Niels go because he's 3 hours ahead of us, so he's probably a little bit tired now. But that was really, really interesting, and so good to see what can be achieved. Taken a long time to perhaps degrade the soils, but in a relatively short space of time, you seem to have brought yours back to life. So it's really, really encouraging. So thank you very much for your time tonight, Niels, and we hope to maybe see you over here in October. We'll talk more about that later.
Okay.
For everybody else, thank you very much for tuning in. As I said, it was a recorded webinar, so I will be sending out a copy of that plus the presentation to you all next week when I get organised. Before you all depart and sign out, I'd really, really appreciate it if you complete our questionnaire, which I'll put up now. It's only short, and it's just helps us to make sure that we keep providing you with the content that you really want to hear. So thank you, and goodbye, everybody.
Yep.
Thanks, Niels.
Thank you.